Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to you too. You guys sleep okay? Only two of you. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Let's get into some of the teachings, but just to remind yourselves, when you look at the schedule, don't be overwhelmed thinking that, oh my Lord, are we going to be able to even eat with all the teachings? We have Spanish teachings too, so I put in the schedule because we have Spanish-speaking people here with us, so we want to also minister to them. So that's when it says Spanish. Clearly, if you don't speak Spanish, you don't have to go. So, and I know that few people already told me that the large amount of teaching, one of the things that happens in Sukkot, when I usually go to, there are some Sukkots that have a lot of teaching, some Sukkots that have practically no teaching. And I'm a firm believer that during Sukkot is a time when you can relax a little bit, hang out with friends, talk about the Word, and study the Bible together. One of the things that we need to be distinct, hi Joe, good morning, brother. One of the things that we need to learn to do, in my opinion, going to different Sukkot and seeing how it functions without minimizing any of them, because they all have the same purpose, to come and to honor the Father and, and to do what we need to do, is finding the balance of camping, hanging out, and learning about God. Some people, it's more like hanging out, camping, and maybe once in a while, let's talk about the Lord. And we need to try to find that balance of, we're here for a purpose. We want to hang out. We want to camp, right? But if you camp and you have a sukkah, you just wasted 7 days. Because the command is to be under the sukkah, at least be under the sukkah. You follow? Build the sukkah. So it's like we need to find that balance of learning how to enjoy ourselves and do take that time. Although Jewish people don't take the time to go camping the way we do. I think for us we're starting out in the nations, it's important that we take the time and say, this is God's sacred space. Let's get together. Let's put a stop to what we're doing and the world out there, and let's praise the Lord. And this is part of the challenge. And then once we get together with the whole work that these guys are doing, setting everything up with Shane, is how can we help bring it together so that the people who are setting this thing up for you don't feel minimized by our lack of effort to support them in being on time or supporting one another and helping around the camp. And Shabbat really is allowing us to take a rest and get away from the craziness in the world. And I'm really thankful to have the opportunity to go to different Sukkots. And this year I invited some Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters because in our culture, we're not really used to this. In our culture, we're not used to this. This is new. So even Juan, I don't think he's ever been in a Sukkot before, right? That's his first time. So imagine if we can translate this into the whole Spanish, which is exploding around the world right now. I started focusing on my Spanish ministry the last 5 or 6 years, 7 years, and it's gone. I have now students all over Latin America. And we have more people now in Spanish than in English, although we have a big audience in English. But it's so big that imagine if we can have a camp of English speakers and Spanish speakers and minister and get to one another. And I think that's what the concept and the principles of getting together for this whole week is, trying to bring some kind of cohesiveness and a team attitude in which we can come together regardless where you come from and say, man, you're my brother and sister. Tell me about your tamales and tell me about your hot sauce. Tell me about your brisket, and your beef bacon. It's so good. Who brought beef bacon? If you brought, that's it. Where's your camp? I'm there. You are my favorite people in camp right now. You've always been, but today, more so. All right? So, I'm hoping that someday we are able to do something in Spanish. Because they need to have also the keep that in prayer. But when we do it in a way that will please the Lord. And can you imagine an explosion of Spanish-speaking people speaking in tongues all day long? Spanish over there, English over here. Why are you looking at me like that, Joe? This week's Torah portion, the reading for Torah portion. And by the way, take advantage of the teachings. Not every day I get to hang out with my teacher And he knows I maximize my time. Lately, I've been so busy. We have a new, brand new little granddaughter, and she takes 99.999%. Man, a 6-hour trip to get halfway through. It took us 15 hours between feedings and stops. It's like, are you kidding me? All of a sudden, one little beady thing takes over your whole life, and you're no longer the same. Praise the Lord, hallelujah. Man, I can't wait for her to be 18 and married and get out of the house. Don't tell my wife that. She would actually agree with you. Anyway, so if you don't see her once in a while, it's because she is now, you understand what happened, she is now grandma and mom. So it's a big change in our lives, and we're making an adjustment, okay? All right, so in the readings of the Torah portion this week, or the readings for Sukkot, there's a lot of prophetic picture, and Joe will cover a lot of that. Gog, Magog is actually read in the Sabbath between. You know, there's a special Sabbath, and those are the readings. Correct me if I'm wrong, okay, Joe? Those are special readings for Sukkot. So it's really interesting how the prophetic picture of the end times is actually found within the readings of Sukkot. Many people quote Gog and Magog and never consider Sukkot, you know. The book of Revelation chapter 14, verse 12, verse 10 to verse 14, or verse 14 on, it uses an agricultural language to teach us about the end times. Let's go there real quickly. Let's go to Revelation chapter 14. The motivation to do the teachings is for you to wanting to expand your understanding on the Bible while we are Sukkot. You eat, you rest, nothing really to go to work, you can then focus. Chapter 14, verse 14, I want you to notice this. It says, Then I look and behold a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, Ben Adam. Now that one verse alone can take us hours to understand. If you look into cultural background, when you look into cultural backgrounds of the Bible when it was written, the Bible was written for us, but it was not written to us. So therefore, we read that verse and we never make a connection about the one riding in the clouds. Now, what's interesting is the book of Daniel tells you that, the one riding in the clouds of heaven. And it's actually, when you contrast that between the Canaanite motif of who Baal was, we got to remember, when the Bible was written, there were people serving in different religions. There were different mythology. There was a different mindset. The Bible, I submit to you, is trying to make a contrast between what the God of Israel requires of his people, utilizing its environment to make a distinction. In other words, you do it this way, my people will reveal through their actions, through their behavior, through their worship, through their offerings, how they do it for me. In other words, we become the image of the invisible God on the earth. You and I, we become the image bearers. The world knows whom we are. Example, we are at Trader Joe's yesterday before we came in. We bought a whole bunch of food. I'm feeding 6 people. 5.5, okay? No, 5.25. So I'm in the line paying for the stuff. It's kind of cool. They have Empire Chicken, Kosher Chicken, I'm buying through. They notice, hey, so what are you guys here for? Oh, we're here for a celebration of a biblical. Also, what do you do? Well, I'm a Bible teacher, so what do you teach? And I began to say, oh, that's really interesting. And then he began to ask me questions. Just the fact that I was buying food, and he noticed Empire Chicken, and he asked me where I was from, what I was there for. I got an opportunity to tell him about the Feast of the Lord. But if I'm just buying something that is not biblical, it's interesting. A combination of everything. From what I'm buying to what I'm saying, who I am, to where I'm going. He made a distinction. It became a topic of conversation for like 5-10 minutes. It was kind of cool. I didn't go there and preach to the guy. But I'm telling him that through my values, now he will be compelled to look into what we do. And the Torah is actually teaching you, if you are the image of God and you represent him on the earth, then you and I, we must understand the culture. The biggest clash you will have when there's Spanish people around is understanding the Southern culture. It's different. It really is. And that sometimes you be like, what are they doing? You will look at us while we eat, and we look at you and go, you guys, these guys are on crack. What's wrong with you people? But it's the culture. There's always someone who becomes a bridge, the communicator of trying to unite both cultures. Say, okay, we mean this, and we do this, and this is today in America. And right now we have the resources to have a translator. I can literally say something on my phone, and I put it back and it translates it for me. We don't even have to learn a second language. It's kind of scary how lazy we're becoming, So what happens is the Bible doesn't have a translator. Or does it? Scripture does have clues and language that when you look into the culture of its day and the archaeology and the topography and the history, you will understand what the Bible is trying to convey to you. It's trying to let you know clearly the message. If only you understand what they were doing at the time the Bible was written, then you know what the verse is trying to convey to you. So the audience in John's time understood these principles. For example, at the time of John, the anti-Messiah or the false Messiah would be, if I say anti-Messiah, antichrist, my teacher will correct me, false Messiah. Did I pass the test? Yes. Yes, I've been corrected by my teacher and I accept the correction. It's not a problem, okay? So what's interesting is that in the time of John, Claudius was considered a false Messiah because the emperor was considered the Son of God. Nero was considered the false Messiah because the emperor was considered also as the one who had the gospel, evangelion, to the kingdom. The good news of the gospel of Rome is very different than the good news of the gospel of Yeshua. Because, you see, Rome acquired power through murder, persecution, oppression, tribulation. In the gospel of the Torah, it's about righteousness and justice. The ultimate righteousness of God is by defeating death. In other words, the emperor no longer has the authority over life and death. It's the God of Israel by resurrecting his son who has the authority over life and death. It's a clear distinction. Who won the power over creation? The God of Israel. Is this making sense? Okay. The first verse, when you talk about the clouds of heaven, you have to connect it with the cloud chariot, back of the ancient, the cloud rider in Canaanite motif. And then you have to connect it with Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. And then you notice in the Gospels, Yeshua says, I am the Son of Man. And they want to kill him. Well, Son of God, no big deal. Son of Man, stone him. So you have to ask the question, why the people reacted differently when he called himself Son of Man? Does he ever call himself the Son of God at all? There are different titles. I'm not saying he's not the Son of God. But in the first century, the Son of God was a title to a king. He was the son of the God he represents. But when he says Son of Man, now he's talking about his divine nature pre-existent from the beginning, that he's there before creation. Complete different thing. Now, let's continue. And it says, one like the Son of Man having on his head a golden crown. A golden crown means that he's enthroned. That enthronement happened in chapter 4 and chapter 5. Which, by the way, the chapter 4 and 5 of the book of Revelation is in the language of Yom Teruah. And Yom Teruah, one of the names is Yom HaKiseh, the throne, enthronement. It's like an enthronement ceremony. Okay? And it says, on his hand a sharp sickle. Now, this is what I introduced the teaching today. It says, and another angel came out of the temple. Now, again, if we don't understand the temple, we're not going to understand this. Guys, I know that every time I teach it's temple, 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 temple. I know it's Joel's fault. It's his fault. He gladly takes that too. You have no idea how much adversity I have to go through just because I want to study the house of God. Ki mitzion tete Torah. He's so contradicting that every Shabbat in the synagogue says, Ki mitzion tete Torah. That is a verse, it proceeds from the temple. Ki mitzion, Zion is the seat of authority, and then they don't want to study the temple. Makes no sense. So what happens is, if we study the temple, we understand the language that it's telling us here. Because it's saying, another angel from the temple, right? So it's not random. Things at the service of the temple were not random. People didn't do things because the Spirit led them. That's not how it worked during the time of the temple service. They did everything orderly with a protocol in its perfect timing. If they did it out of timing, if someone who is not a Levite did a job of the Levite, he will be in trouble. If a Levite did the job of the priest, he will be in trouble. This is the reason I told Shane and Michelle, I'm only here to support you guys. Our role is clear. I cannot go beyond the threshold of my authority that is not given to me. I do not do the singing. Last night with the Shabbat, it's Shabbat. I do that in my house. But I don't come over here and try to take over the singing or the audio or the communications or Michelle. No, that's not our job. We have a team working together in order for us to honor God. That's really the whole motivation. We are a team, right? Okay, so it says... And another angel came out of the temple crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, trust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle to the earth, and the earth was reap. Now you need to find out what is reap of, what is harvest of. Then another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, also having a sharp sickle, and another angel came out from the altar. Which one? Is the altar of incense on the great altar outside in the court of Israel, of the priests, who had the power over fire, and he cried with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, trust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So now the question is, what time of the year is this talking about? Now, it's talking about the second coming of Mashiach, talking about judgment, yes? But we read this, and because we're not tuned in, gracias, Juan. So we read this, and if we're not connecting the agricultural cycles of Israel, we're not going to understand the prophetic message behind this. Now, I'm not going to give you the answer. That's going to be your homework. You need to go and find an agricultural cycle, not of the United States, but in the hemisphere, the northern hemisphere in the Middle East, and find out why the feasts are around the harvest seasons. You need to know that. That's important. Because then all this argument about Rosh Hashanah versus Yom Teruah, or whether or not Nisan or Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah is the head of the year, would end, because the book of Exodus tells you that at the end of the year, Tishri, at the end of the year, Exodus says that. Joe, can you remember what that is? It's Exodus 34, verse 12, I think it is. Okay, I want you to notice the language. It gives you the 34. I have a Bible with Spanish, English next to it, and I always get confused. Okay. 18. It says, the feast of unleavened bread you shall keep 7 days. You shall eat unleavened. This is Exodus 34. As I commanded you in the appointed time of the month of Aviv. It's appointed. In other words, it's a set time. The question is, why is it a set time, and why you should never change it? It's not an argument about calendars. It's about why does a God say it's an appointed time? The question is, if it's appointed for God, for us to bring it to the Lord, the question is, why is he saying that specifically? Why can't you just bring it any other time? If you look ancient Near Eastern history and start looking into the surrounding nations around Israel, you get it quickly. Makes perfect sense. Okay? So, you see, while we argue about the calendar, whether it's this sliver or that moon or this or that, we miss the message behind the message. Why does God want you to meet during the Passover season when there's barley, barley harvest? Okay, how come Passover is not in the time of the wheat harvest? It's Pentecost. So as we keep reading, it says, and at the open of the, unleavened bread as I commanded you at the appointed times, of the month of Aviv. For the month of Aviv you came out of Egypt. All that opened the womb is mine. There's another one here. I'm looking down. 6 days shall work. Verse 21. On the seventh day you shall rest, and in plowing time, and in harvest you shall rest. You shall observe the feast of weeks. Now it goes. The feast of Aviv is telling you unleavened bread. It's actually help me out. What's this harvest? Barley, thank you. And then you have wheat, the feast of weeks, right? And it says, of the first fruits of your wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering, and the feast of ingathering at year's end. Let's read that verse with me. Verse 22. Verse 22. Can somebody read it really loud for me up there? Can somebody read it really loud out here? 22. Exodus 34:22.
And perform the festival of Shavuot for yourself in the first fruits of wheat harvest and the festival of ingathering at the turn of your year.
At the turn of the year. I don't understand. I thought the end of the year, if you start Nisan, is the month of Adar. That's the end of the year. So what years are talking about? Is it the fiscal year or the agricultural cycle? Or the agricultural cycle? Which one is it? We need to find which one it is. We need to find out which one it is. There it is. It came back. Okay? We need to know why it says at year's end. Because I thought that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, is the head of the year. Head of the year for what? Because the head of the year for the agricultural cycle is in the month of Nisan. You see the conflict? Many people read these verses. They don't really focus on this. And they say year's end. Year's end for what? The agricultural cycle ends. I go to Israel except for COVID, every year in November. I'm going back this November in English. Next May, Temple Course in Jerusalem for 12 days. Next November is a Spanish tour. But every time I get there in November, the grape harvest is already collected. All the grapes are collected. All the olives are collected. All the dates are collected. So you need to find out when is the grapes harvest, when they're ripe. They start late July. By September, they have to be already ready to be picked up. By October, it's already picked up. They're ready. So the book of Revelation 14 is actually telling you about the one coming in the clouds of heaven. It tells you when judgment will occur. It's going to be according to a particular season. There were some people within the movement saying that September 23 will be the end of the world. I'm getting sick of people keep prophesying stuff, and then who keeps them accountable? How about all the people who are running around crazy with their heads cut off, thinking the end of the world, who are believers in the God of Israel, and they keep telling everybody the end of the world will happen, and they live in fear, and then nothing happens. What happens to our faith? Who is going to be shamed? We are, because we live in fear. Yet the Bible gives us a timeline, and God has been consistently accurate in everything He says and when He says. But we need to tune in into His language. We need to tune in into the way He describes things and how they will happen. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. We're not going to be able to understand the end times. And that's why Sukkot has a prophetic language in it. It has a prophetic. And that's what we're going to be studying now. But before we do that, before we study all that, I want us to have an introduction about contrasting. You know, contrast between the Bible and contrasting between the ancient world, as I have it right here. Now, the reason why I read Revelation 14 and then now Exodus 34 is for you to at least get an understanding, make you think. And I want you to formulate questions throughout the week, if you like. You see me around, you see Joe, you see Juan. Just ask us. Hey, let's talk about this language. Or do you know about this? I'm not interested in the form of the earth. I'm not saying that to you may not be important. I'm not minimizing you. Please understand, I'm not going to talk about it. It's better things to do. If it is or not, it's okay. Salvation is not based on that. There's so many other things we can learn that will bring our spiritual walk into a higher level than just one topic the whole time, all the time. So let's find those questions that will allow us to understand the Bible better. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, so, all right. So, when you read in Leviticus chapter 22, let's go to Leviticus chapter 22. That's the reading for today. We're not going to read the whole chapter, but we're going to read parts of chapter 23. You already know the chapter, so we don't need to repeat a lot of stuff. But in verse, I think 22 or 26, starts in 26. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, and he goes into some of the offerings. It says, when a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with his mother. And from the 8th there he shall accept it as an offering made by fire to the Lord. That establishes also what a new year is. Let's read that verse. Because we say that a lamb of the first year. And we tell people all the time, do you know that when the lamb is born, 8 days after, it's already considered a year old? Did you know that? So when you see a lamb of the first year, you know Passover. If you don't do this, please don't stone me. Okay? But we put in Passover Seder, we put in a shank bone and an egg. I know. But this is what I do in my house because I understand what it means. It's okay. All right, I put a shank bone and an egg. Now, we cannot eat the lamb because, well, let me rephrase that. We cannot call lamb that we eat the Korban Pesach, the Passover lamb, because only in Jerusalem, according to Deuteronomy 16, can that happen within the city of Jerusalem. We don't have a temple, there's no city of Jerusalem, but we can, if you eat lamb or if you eat meat, just make sure that you don't call anything like that a offering. Okay, so the representation of the 1-year-old lamb is actually the shank bone. It's a representation. The egg is a representation of the second animal, Deuteronomy 16, that you will have. Because you see, when you eat Passover, people eat Passover lambs by themselves. They do the Passover Seder by themselves. Normally in temple times, they will do it with a minimum group of 10 people. Maximum 20. Minimum 10. You never ate it alone. It's a covenantal meal with a group. Okay. So if you have people like me who eat a little bit more than the normal, you can't, 8, 9-day-old lamb or a 10-day-old lamb, they're very tiny. They don't have a lot of meat. So you got to make sure everyone eats. So you have another animal that you can slaughter, and you can also roast to make sure that everyone eats. Because now here we see what it says right here. It says, and a bull and a sheep or a goat is born. It shall be 7 days with its mother. And from the 8th day thereafter, it shall be accepted as an offering made by fire to the Lord. That's a 8-year-old lamb. Because now they consider the gestation period as part of the age process. So I'm actually 58. Spent 9 months in the womb. You know? Is this making sense? How many of you never thought about it that way before? So now we know. You see, this is how the temple allows us to understand the Torah, and the Torah allows us to understand what was done in the temple. Now you know why. If you see, I saw a lamb of 14 days, and I'm thinking, that for 20 people? People will go hungry. You know, you read Deuteronomy 16 and tells you, you can go slaughter something else to compensate. Make sure that everyone understands, everyone gets to eat. That's where that comes from. It's from this week's portion, and that's a command. Isn't that interesting? So, in chapter 23, it continues to go in. Let me keep reading here so we can work off of this. It says, verse 25. It says, 28th, whether it is a cow or you do not kill both her and her young the same day. When you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving to the Lord, offer it on your own free will. On the same day shall be eaten. You shall leave none until evening. I am the Lord. Let me ask you a question. Why? Why can you not leave it until evening? How come you have to eat it right away? Passover is the same thing. Now, it's a twofold thing. One, it's a health issue. Second, it's also, repeat after me, kedusha. It means holiness, the laws of holiness. If you dedicate something that is for God, and this is for the worship of God, is dedicated to the Lord, then no one else can eat it because it's at a high level of holiness. And this is important. That's why for me, Passover is a very special time. It's a covenantal meal. So I don't just invite just anybody to my house. I want to make sure that people who are invited, they follow requirements of obedience to the Torah, that I'm accountable because they sat at the table of the Lord. Anyway, that's another conversation. It says, therefore you shall keep my commandments and perform them. I am the Lord. Okay? And this is the important part. It says, and you shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. So that's interesting. He's connecting the way you present an offering and how to do it with profaning his name. Okay? Many people take that verse in isolation. But the context of the verse is dealing with offerings that are accepted and that are not accepted. So you have to say, wait a minute. So if I offer this during the temple times and I did it according to my own understanding, in my own way, then I am profaning his name because I am presenting something that's supposed to be of higher elevation of holiness. Does that make sense? Example. Let's say you buy your wife, or you had a ring that you want to give your wife. And you have that ring for 25 years. It's a beautiful, expensive ring. It costs a lot of money. It's gorgeous. And you give it to your wife. She goes, oh, honey, you love me. And she puts it on. She goes, tell her friends, look how beautiful. And that's a representation in your mind of what your husband says is expression of his love by giving you a gift. He's a good husband. He forgot to tell you that ring he gave to his first wife. And he got it back in the divorce settlement. Look at Maribel over there. She's going like, What would you do to Juan if he did that? What? He is gone. Now, let me ask you a question. Did the ring stop being beautiful? Did the ring stop being costly? But how come she would not be pleased with that ring? Because that ring was already hallowed for somebody else. Welcome to the feast. That means that this camp is sacred ground to the Lord. We have dedicated it for him. It's not Israel. But now we hallow the area to honor his name by our behavior, not by how much we pronounce the name. And this is exactly the point. So if you take the offerings and you give it to Baal, right? And then Baal doesn't do anything on your behalf, then Baal, you need me to stop moving, huh? Okay. So, is this better? All right. I can talk with my hands now. Isn't it great? How do I put this back? Oops, not long enough. No. All right, so, what was I saying? I was going to be pleased with that? Well, in the book of Hosea said, to do that? In the book of Hosea, your offering and you this and that is not acceptable to me. I'm sick of your sound. Don't bring anything. The system is not accepting those things. When in fact, okay, is that better or is this doing okay? Okay. Huh? Okay. You want me to? Okay. So in the book of Leviticus, what we have is God is saying, I want to consecrate my people, but I want them to bring an offering for me. Why does he require offerings? I mean, he's above any consolation, any songs, any blessing, anything. He's above it. Okay? So why does he need offerings for? And many people in Christianity says, you need me to change? Okay. Many people in Christianity say, there you go. We'll make your guys. This is camp. Think about it. The biggest adversity we have today, just a bad mic on camp. Put it in perspective. Seriously. Think about it. Oops, even. Now we got chaos. Put it right here. We got to keep. Okay, so give me a regular mic. It's easy. Much better. You got it? Hello? You got it? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why. I'm not going to cover every one of the feasts because you already been doing this long enough to know. I don't have to repeat Sabbath and the feast and all that. You already know. But what time of the year did the story of Ruth occurred? What time of the year? Shavuot. Why? Wheat. So the verses actually tell you what time of the year it was. Interesting. So that's a very important thing. Now we learned today about Revelation, what time of the year it's talking about in chapter 14. In chapter 4, we're talking about that time of the year when it says, and the doors will open in heaven. Now we know what time of the year. You see, the language of the Bible is quite interesting. There's a huge movement in the Spanish world of biblical science. In the Spanish world, this is the way many people are rejecting the Torah, Messiah, and going to crazy things. It's called biblical science. What they do is they take verses and they find for every little mistake in the New Testament and all of the documents of the New Testament. Oh, it's not lining up and it's not this. I don't know about you, but the fact that we have evidence in the New Testament that has been written down, and this is a beautiful thing about the New Testament, okay? Are there things that seem to be contradictory? Yeah. But I don't know if you will get the story straight. If you are born in the year 2000, you're born in the year 2010. I was born in 66. Someone will be born in 50-something and 30. The world has changed from 1930 to 2023. Let's say that a story develops a little later throughout 50-year history, right? I remember when I was a high school player, I was pretty decent. I played professionally 6 years. In high school, every year I go back, or whenever I go back to my old high school, I always meet somebody who played with me or played against me, played on the same team. And it seems like my home runs keep getting farther and farther and farther away. And I'm listening to this guy trying to tell the story of a home run that I hit in high school. And I remember that barely cleared the fence. And this guy's having it going over the building. And I'm going like, no, man, it wasn't that far. I hit the second window. He said, no, man, you hit the 7th-story high. That's a huge building. I said, okay, thank you. But it's like it didn't happen that way. That is in the last 30 years, Imagine 2,000 years without the proper translation, without the contrast. So without the archaeology, without all the information. No wonder you have the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. The Catholic Church decided no one can read the Bible. People are too stupid to read it. We are the only ones who can read it. Of course, because by reading it, then you can manipulate whatever it says to your own convenience. Right? And then comes the Protestants who said, no, we can read too. And we're going to have a printing of the Bible. You no longer have sole control. And then you have all the persecution and all that stuff. Oh, I got a better idea. Why don't we just get rid of the people of the book? They're the ones who keep talking about the God of Israel. Oh, let's get rid of them. Then we can do whatever we want. You follow the point? In the late 1800s, then something miraculously happens. They find hundreds, if not thousands, of ancient documents leading and also from the time of the Bible, the time of the Nusi tablets, during the time of Jacob in the book of Genesis. Okay? And then you have the Hittite documents during the time of Moses when they came out of Egypt. So now we have all of these documents. They begin to decipher the documents from their own language, and they found that many things the Bible was talking about was part of culture. And then you read the Bible and you read what they were doing. You're going like, now I know why the Lord said this. All of a sudden you got validity to the word of the Lord. Now in the New Testament, however, remember the New Testament is a compendium of letters that were written. It's a historical account. I believe it's divinely inspired. I do. but we understand that there are different time frames, different audience, different geographical locations, different areas that they lived in. For example, let me go through a list of areas that, in my opinion, should be studied when you study the New Testament. Things that I had to look into in order to understand the words of Yeshua and the words of the apostles and to whom they were talking to. For example, imperial cult. That's patron-client relationship. Honor and shame. Fertility rituals in Corinth. We need to learn about the Greco-Roman religion, the caste system of Rome, Roman law, criminal law. Remember, Paul was writing to the Romans, and he's using as a backdrop the law of the Roman Empire. He is trying to contrast the God of Israel through Yeshua the Messiah, his son, and how his son is going to bring order, who is now greater than the emperor, who was the Lord of the kingdom. Now, again, if we understand, next year when I leave in May, God willing, I got a temple course in Israel. After my temple course in Israel, I am staying with my family. We're going to Asia Minor, we're going to Greece, and we're going to Rome. We're going to do recordings in Spanish and in English in order to highlight a lot of the New Testament verses in light of the structures that I will be visiting and trying to. Eventually, I'm going to do a tour that will be in the full step of Paul, trying to contrast the New Testament with what we see in some of those places. Clearly, we cannot visit them all, but we do our best. Okay, so if you're interested in that, stay tuned to our website to make sure you can come with us eventually and enjoy that. So in the New Testament, you're going to have a lot of information that is important to understand the contrast. By the way, how many of you, and I'm going to ask questions to get an idea where you're at. Please raise your hands to give an idea how far I could expand on the topic. But how many of you have never looked into what the Isthmian Games are? Isthmian Games. Okay, perfect. The Isthmian Games were like the Pan American Games or the Olympic Games, 4 years. But the Isthmians took place every 2 years. That was taking place exactly during the time Paul was in Corinth. Okay, then you have when Paul says, everything, todo me es lícito, pero no todo me conviene. How do you say that one in English? Everything is permissible. Paul said. Thank you. There you go. Thank you. You know what was going on in the Roman Empire, specifically in Corinth? In Corinth, what happened was that a Roman citizen, and by the way, I submit to you that the letter to the Corinthians was not written to slaves or the freedmen. The letter to the Corinthians was written to the plebeians and the patricians, the upper level of the caste system, because of what's going on. I'm going to prove it to you. Now, obviously, pornea, which is actually, sexual immorality, was prevalent through all the classes. But remember that the slaves didn't really have a lot of rights. So a Roman man can have sex with another man or a woman as long as the other man was not a Roman citizen and the woman was not a Roman citizen or married. If she was a prostitute or a slave, the man can just have at it. And no one can say anything about it. Okay? That's important to know. Again, that's the backdrop of what Paul is dealing with. But there's something really interesting, that a Roman citizen in Corinth, when they would do the Isthmian Games, they had the temple of Apollo, they had the temple of Aphrodite, they had the temples of Asclepius, they had all these temples of the ancient world, and they had cafeterias, and they had meat sacrificed to those idols, and the priests could not eat them all, so they would do a huge feast, and they would invite all of the citizens, Roman citizens of the kingdom, to partake of the feast as a sign of loyalty to that God. You missed it. Was not Paul a Roman citizen? Didn't he have the right to eat of those sacrifices as a Roman law, but he knew it was not profitable because it would be meat sacrificed to idols? How many of you did not know that? See, these are the little bitty things that when we read the book of Corinth, now we're saying, wait a minute, there's more to the story than what we've seen. It's like watching CNN. You watch CNN, you believe not even 1% of a 1%. Half of a percent. Right? Because there's got to be more. You hear Fauci, you go, nah. La, 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 la. You know what I'm saying? So when I read the Bible, I'm looking at it not from my theological positions of the way I wanted to say or the way, but I feel it this way. To me, it means this way. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, that's not what the Bible is written for a private interpretation. Even Paul told you that. It cannot be used for private interpretation. It will not make sense because then you have an interpretation. You have one. And if you speak to us Spanish-speaking people, then I'm not going to have the Passover. If you're Mexican, you can put salsa in it. If you're Puerto Rican, make it with beans. You get it? God ordained it in a particular way to create order, to make sure that his people were distinct. Don't do it the way they do it. The book of Deuteronomy tells us, don't do what the Canaanites do. So what did the Canaanites do? Let me give you an idea what the Canaanites do, and then I'm going to go into the PowerPoint. And I promise you I finish exactly the time that it says. 11:30. Is that okay? Are you having a good time so far? Yeah. We study the temple for a reason, but I also study a lot of the history to understand its context. So I'm going to read this a little bit. It says, ancient Egypt and the Old Testament. How many years did Israel live in Egypt? 210. 210 years. 400 from the moment that the covenant was made. Okay? How many years they live in Babylon? 70. Okay. How many years would the Greco-Roman Hellenized people influence Israel and then the Roman Empire? Okay, so let me get this straight. They lived in Egypt. We never study Egyptology. They went to the land of Canaan. We never bothered to study the Canaanite religion. They were influenced by the Hellenistic Greeks. We never studied their culture and the way they did things. They were conquered by the Romans, right? But we never study Roman law. And we never understand the Roman culture to understand the contrast between Yeshua and what he's telling them versus the way it was going on in the first century. Then we read the New Testament and we got 49,000 denominations proving the point that no one bothered to go back to the original understanding what they were doing. And we're doing the same thing, by the way. The Torah community is doing exactly the same thing. You cannot take the Torah and reinterpret the Bible according to the Adventists, the way you grew up, Baptists, Pentecostals, and Christian religions. We are coming out of the system and learning to re-educate ourselves in certain areas in order to understand the message. I love my Christian brothers. Do I agree with them on certain things? No. I'm not going to put them down. Many things in the church were correct. Would you agree with that? Thank you, Lord. Thank you for the foundation. It was right. We got out of there. Let's stop going back. And the reason why we never move forward is because we do not understand where we came from and where we're going. And the contrast between the feast of God and not mixing it with the feast of the nations. Now, whether you think Easter or Christmas or whatever, people are now trying to justify Christmas and Easter. It's irrelevant. It's the way the nations celebrate their special days. And God says, you do not do that with me. Oh, but does that mean you can celebrate the 4th of July? It's the Day of Independence. No one's worshiping anybody. It's completely different things. Thanksgiving. Hello. Give thanks to God that he provided food on your table. No one's worshiping the turkey. You follow what I'm saying? So we need to learn the contrast. So let me read this. I know it's kind of, But where were they going when they left Egypt? What was their destination? Come on, guys. Canaan. Thank you. So what was the Canaanite worship? How was the Canaanite worship? How did they worship their gods so that we will not do the same? Because it's called syncretism. The last thing you want to do is mix holy and profane. That God despises that. Look, every instinct in the Bible, when Israel compromised God's holiness and his holy things and mixed it with the nations, it never went well. The 10 tribes of Israel are still in the dispersion because of it. So let me read this to you. It says, the Canaanite religion. The religion of Canaan revolved around the elaborate system of ritual. Primarily, the Canaanite cult centered upon the forms of worship that promoted sex and fertility. Such an emphasis sprang logically from the Canaanites' belief that sustaining the cycle of life and death was absolutely vital of the fertility of their flocks, fields, and wives. The rituals aimed chiefly to invoke the God's favor upon the worshiper. By manipulating the divine through magic, productivity was assured. One form of Canaanite manipulation was the practice of child sacrifice, especially the offering of firstborn sons to the gods. Interesting. God says, I'm redeeming your firstborn. They're mine. While the Canaanites are murdering their firstborn to maintain fertility of the earth. It says, this ancient society believed that if they gave the first of their offsprings to the gods, then the gods will continue to grant fertility to Canaanite women. By sacrificing children, the Canaanites also hoped to compel the gods to intervene in life-threatening situations. Archaeological discoveries at Carthage include the charred remains of hundreds of child sacrifices. Historical records and stone monuments indicates that these victims were sacrificed in order to gain the God's favor and intervention. Temple prostitution was another common practice. The Canaanites used to gain the God's goodwill. Male and female prostitutes attached to the central sanctuary and shrines were known in the Old Testament and Canaanite literature as Kedeshim. By the way, remember the story of Judah and Tamar? Interesting. Go back and look it up in the Hebrew. He thought she was a prostitute because she put a veil. It says, and she veiled her face. And he thought she was a prostitute. Whoa. So she puts a veil and he thinks she's a prostitute? So the question is, what did the veil represent at the gate of the city in that culture? Just so happened that a woman in the ancient world, if she could not have children, or in this case, once in her time, not have children, but because it deals with temple prostitution, deals with children. So I was right. Tamar lost her husband, right? She had no children. She understood the culture of his day, and a woman in the ancient world, in certain places, a woman can go and sit at the gate of the city or sit at the gate of a temple, and any man can come by, throw any kind of money in her lap. She will go have sex, and then she will present that offering to the God's altar to give her children. That's why the Torah says in the book of Numbers that a hire of a prostitute is not accepted in God's altar. You read that commandment before. Okay? So what's interesting is that also that occurred in Corinth. In certain instances, they will do fertility rituals there all the time. There was fornication in the Bible. Fornication was sex in the fertility rituals. So what's interesting in the story of Tamar is that when he comes in to trying to sleep with her, Judah does, she asks for something. Why are you going to give me the guarantee? Okay, and then after they have the sexual act, he leaves, she leaves, and then he sends someone, and he says, go look for the prostitute, Kana. But then when the messenger comes back, he says, I could not find Kadasha. The two names are different. One is a prostitute, the other one is the separated one. There's a connection there with temple prostitution. And that happened in the temple too. Is this making sense to you guys? I didn't want to do the typical, these are the feasts, you must obey them, because why would I want to say something that you're already observing? You're already here. It's like saying, it's Shabbat, it's holy, you got to keep it you're here on Shabbat. So why do I have to reiterate that? Now, I'll do that if I'm going to a Christian church that they ask me to talk about it, then I will speak on this topic because I want them to know why we do it and why it's important. You already know. Otherwise, you wouldn't have set aside 7 days to go camping in the middle of nowhere, literally middle of nowhere. I mean, I feel safe here. No joke, man. Just to get in here, it's like how many miles? 2 miles? 2 or 3 miles? I will never know there was a camp in here unless I have Google Earth. It's kind of crazy how isolated we are. Feel safe. We're enjoying our freedom within limits, right? Okay, so let me keep reading here. Watch this. It says, in 1 14, verse 14 says, there were also male shrine prostitutes in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord had driven out from before the Israelites. Hey, man, Easter, for example, we know Easter. I mean, what does a bunny with eggs in color mean? Fertility. So why would anybody who follows Torah want to observe Easter and the whole ritual that is not even connected with the resurrection of Yeshua? Syncretism. So even if people say, well, that's not really, we're celebrating the birth of Yeshua. That's not the turn right now. If you go to every store around the United States, they're not emphasizing the resurrection of Yeshua. They're emphasizing the bunnies and the eggs. It's fertility rituals. It's no longer about the resurrection of Messiah. Even if it happens on the same day that we celebrate Passover, you're still not to do what they do. We are to do what I do. And they told us, do a Seder. Retell the story. Exodus 13:8. Retell the story of our redemption. Do we do that? Oh, no, that's Jewish. That's rabbinical. We don't want to do that. But yet it's a command to do the story of the redemption. So we know the difference between what Israel does versus what the nations do. But we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. Yes, collecting eggs or running around with little bunnies. And teaching your children that the resurrection is connected to fertility rituals. So the question is this. Why would God ask Israel to bring the offerings at this time of the year, in the beginning of the year? Now, that's the biggest argument about calendars. Oh, it happened, the Nisan is the first of the year, and also, Tishri is the first of the year. But no, Tishri celebrated the first of the year. That's Babylonian. That comes from Babylon. Newsflash, people, that's not true. The Babylonian New Year actually began on the 5th of Nisan for 12 days. And they used to do the ritual of Akidu. It took 12 days. Started on Nisan 5th for 12 days. So now we're going to stop celebrating Passover because it falls during the time when the Babylonians kept the New Year? So let me ask you guys a question. Does it really matter when the Babylonians do their first year? Or does it matter how God says for us to observe what everybody did to their gods the first year, but how to celebrate it for them? It's a distinction. Yes? Are you with me? All right, good. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through this PowerPoint really quickly. I'm going to show you a language in the Bible. In 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about the full stool. Full stool. Now, you're going to see 9 people underneath the feet. The 9 are 5 either Semites and 4 Africans. Okay, Nubians. It's the original name, Nubian. By the way, did you know that Africa's original name was Eden? That's the original name. Leave you that. Ask me about that later. That's really cool. Okay. So, the way it was done, Tutankhamun, that's this full stool of Tutankhamun. Okay? He had 9 bows. And he had the 5 Nubians and the 4 Nubians and the 5 Semites. There were kingdoms who were submitted under his authority. He has enemies under his feet. It meant sole victory over them, control and authority. That language resonates through the whole New Testament. 1 Corinthians. And to he make all the enemies his full stool, dominion over the earth. The title King of Kings and Lord of Lords, for example, King Cyrus, he was considered King of Kings and Lord of Lords because he had over 190 provinces and kings and prince under his authority. So he was the King of Kings and the Lord of all the lords. Yeshua's title will be King of Kings and Lord of Lords because he will rule and reign over all the earth. He's going to have the authority. He will make his enemies his full stool. It doesn't diminish who he is. It establishes authority that God has given him on the earth. Is this making sense? Okay. Oh, this is the sandals. He had 1 Nubian and 1 Semite. We know now what the people looked like back in the day. Just the way they look today. Okay? You notice that the slaves were Nubians and Semites. Because back in the ancient world, slavery was not regulated to color. Slavery was more of a state in which you cannot take care of your needs. And sometimes you sold yourself into slavery in order to survive. And many times, you conquer a kingdom. And when you conquer the kingdom, you destroy the kingdom. You destroy the king. You kill the king. Once you kill the king, then you destroy the temple. Once you kill the temple, you rape the women. Why? They kill the king and the family. So there's never a remnant of somebody like the root of Jesse. When it says, and there shall come forth the root of Jesse, a branch out of the root. In the ancient world, that was an idiom for the kingdom's restoration. The kingdom will be restored. So when you cut the seed or when you cut the whole tree, but you leave roots, that root is going to come blossom again. But you have to take it out of the roots so that they will kill the king, the prince, the wife, and all the harem and the children, making sure that there will not one person who can reclaim the throne. That's important. They try to do that with Yeshua. They try to kill the root of Jesse, right? And he has resurrected. That's what resurrection is for. When he resurrected, nunca he hecho esa conexión, ¿viste? Resurrected, now he's the root of Jesse, the branch out of the root who was cut off by the enemy, the devil, and now he is blossomed exactly during the time where resurrection was the theme of the year. Let me explain. In the ancient world, they believed that Baal and the rain was a sperm. They believed that the rain of the spring, in the early spring, it comes from winter, complete death. This is the reason why in the Mediterranean, the new year of the agricultural cycle always happen after February, March, early March to April. It goes from winter. From winter goes into what they understood being death. Nothing blossoms. Trust me, if Moses was in New Zealand or Australia, Passover will be this time of the year. Let me repeat that again. If Moses would have lived in New Zealand or Australia, it's the southern hemisphere. It is now making a transition from winter to spring over there. I was just in Chile. Okay? Now we're making transition from summer into winter, from autumn into winter, fall into winter. Pretty soon, all these trees, how beautiful it looks, it's not going to look the same. Right? Everything dies. Then there comes the rains. Then people plant. Then comes the other rains. Then comes the seed is that they buried, now died, and now comes up. When it comes up, now they have a harvest. So to them, their visual cosmology was, okay, it's the beginning of the year in the fall. Okay, that's for counting of years. But for the agriculture, we don't do that in the fall. We plant in the fall and the winter, and then we reap in the spring, and so on and so forth. We different harvest. All right, so that means that winter, everything dies. Death. Rain, who provides the rain? Is it Marduk? Is it Baal? Is it the god of the Hittites? Is it Ra? Who does? That's the search. So, okay, so who's the god of the storm? Baal. Okay, so he's the one who provides the rain. The rain is a sperm. It's all based on fertility. The Mother Earth, that's where it comes from. Mother Earth is a fertility ritual language. So receives the rain, the sperm of Baal. It has cosmic sex with the earth, which is dead. And now the seed that was planted dies and resurrects. In every culture, resurrection was prevalent in the spring. Let me repeat that again. In the ancient cultures, resurrection was prevalent in the spring. Is this making sense? What better way to show Yeshua to be the true seed of the land of David who is resurrected? By resurrecting during the time frame where everyone was bringing offerings to their gods. The Canaanites brought it to their gods. The Hittites brought it to their gods. The Mesopotamians, the Egyptians brought it to their gods. And then all of a sudden now, Israel brings the first fruits of their harvest to the God that no one's seen. That's why another contrast is the throne of Pharaoh. Notice, it's a seat, it's a throne, carried by slaves. It looks familiar, doesn't it? It's a throne. So the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was a throne carried by the Levites, by the priests, carried by the priests, who are the sons of Levi, doesn't mean that now we're not going to have the Ark of the Covenant because the pharaohs had a throne. You see movies all along the Middle Ages. They had the queen and the king and their guys carrying her. Are we going to stop now studying the temple because the Ark of the Covenant represented a throne and they had thrones that looked like the Ark of the Covenant? What's the difference? that in the Ark of the Covenant, there's not an image sitting of any God or a human, in this case, sitting on it, is the seat of the creator of the universe. It's a contrast. Is that making sense? Now, think about this from psychological perspective. You serve the God of the Egyptians, and you think that the Pharaoh is the image of that God who sits on that throne on the earth, which is a representation of who sits on the heavenly throne. Now, we are the crazy Hebrews. We don't know what our God looks like. He is just invisible, but he has power. Then all of a sudden now, they see the Levites going on with the Ark of the Covenant, leading them in the wilderness. There's no one sitting on it. Oh, I don't think you got it. There's no one sitting on it, and they keep winning every war. Wait a minute. Who is their king? The Bible says that Moses was the prince. He's the representation of God on the earth, but he never sat on the. Did Moses ever sat on the Ark of the Covenant? But wait a minute. Wasn't he appointed? Lo capté ahora mismo. Wasn't he appointed as the one in charge on the earth on behalf of God? But it never dare him be put on the altar, on the Ark of the Covenant, right? Perfect. So psychologically, think about how the people of the nations, Moab and other kings, will see the Ark of the Covenant. There's no one sitting on it, yet they win all the time. Then they will know that the invisible God was powerful God. Instead of going to give it to an image in which it has no authority and power, they're bringing it to the temple. And the food source for the priests was the animals. That's the food source. When I say sacrifices, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Death, right? To many people, 99% of my Christian brothers that I deal with all the time, I ask this question. Think about this. First thing that comes to mind, I ask, what does sacrifice mean to you? And everyone says, death of the animal. In Hebrew is come near the Lord, korban, to come near him. To come near him. So when the Lord says, even if you do something wrong, I want you to approach me. I want you to come near me and let's fix it. In the minds of people who don't study the temple, it's about killing of the animal. In the temple, it was about the blood ratifying your relationship that you transgress against God. And then food, the animal's meat, now becomes the food source in certain offerings for the priests and their families and the Levites. It's a well-organized, orderly way of maintaining everybody to do their thing. Are you guys with me so far? We're doing okay? Okay, perfect. So, let me give you some examples of contrast, distinction between the Lord's tabernacle and the pagan Hittite temple. The number of deities worshipped, it's not the first day yet, I'm losing my voice. It means that it's going to be a great week. You shall have no mighty against my face. The Hittite Empire was known as the land of 1,000 gods. So I'm not going to go deep into this, but it was considered the land of 1,000 gods. So to them, they were always seeking of the God of creation, just like humanity does now. Israel, they're not to have an image. Question, why is Israel commanded not to make any image of anything above, anything below? Because it's very unique, right? I mean, it's easier to believe in something you see. But yet, that image cannot do anything for you. But then God says, you shall have no image of anything. It is an abomination against me if you do that. So the question is, why is it an abomination to have an image of something that cannot do anything for you anyway? By the way, to them, that was a representation of the God they've never seen. For example, to the Egyptians, the golden calf, the calf, was a representation of what God was to them. So in their minds, they thought, that's the God of Israel, because it represented strength. But obviously, it's against the commandment. Okay? The question is why? Why is it an abomination to have anything for worship? Somebody can read Genesis 1:26, please. Really quickly, I'm running my voice, so I guess I need to stop then. You don't want me to talk anymore. 1:26. 1:26. So, thank you, Joe. So, the purpose of creation was that humans can have dominion over God's creation. So, the Lord tells you, you are now created in my image. By the way, you know the word image there in Hebrew is B'Tselem. Tselem is idol. It's actually an idol. We are supposed to represent Him, represent His character through our behavior, not that we are now to be worshipped. That's why it's interesting that athletes and and music stars and and actors, they're called idols. And it's interesting that those idols people worship, and then you get to realize how they are in human life in reality, and then you're so disappointed because they're like not really what you thought they were. And then you're surprised that you were willing to buy their stuff, stand for that stuff, go to their concerts, and then when you get a chance to meet them, they were so tired of being worshipped because they don't want to be worshipped, they just want to sing, that they just mistreat you, make you feel like you're worthless after you invested $300 in a concert to go see them. Isn't that interesting? Because their gifts were supposed to be to the worship of God. Their gift. When I see a stadium full of people raising their hands, acting like a fool at a major concert, we can't get anybody to show up early enough to do singing for the Lord. But when they go to a concert, because it's based on the flesh, and many things are based on dealing with your natural instinct, they do stuff they would never do in a regular conversation. And they're there to basically idolize what they scream, they cry, they raise their hands, they go up and down for somebody that I could do absolutely nothing for them. That's the modern day definition of ancient worship. It's crazy. We've gone back full circle, but with technology, it's the same thing. God has given us a great gift. He needs you to know who you are. He needs you to understand that you are not just someone only wounded by the world, but you have been healed and you have been set aside, you have been made holy, and He brings you to special invitations. The first one is Shabbat. The first invitation is Shabbat. He starts by trying to restore your family. He gives the father of the home the authority to lead the service in their home, to bless the wife, to bless the children, to teach them about the word. Establishes a protocol of a kingdom in the family structure first. Then after that, you go to congregation. Then He invites you to the days of redemption. Then He invites you to Matan Torah, the day that the Torah was giving, that is the constitution of your permanent freedom. Then He invites you to Yom Teruah, the day of His enthronement. Then He invites you to Yom Kippur. So to know that you should have been judged, but God found you innocent. He gave you justification. He purified you. Now you come in and you say, I'll pray on behalf of all the billions of people who do not have access to you, my King. And I'm going to stop eating for one day. Just for at least for one day, feel how a hungry feels every day. Have mercy on them like you have mercy on me. We have come to the place that now we don't even want to do Yom Kippur. We don't even want to pray to the Father. We don't want to do all these things because Jesus died and resurrected, so we don't care about the world anymore. It's all about us. We forget that we are called here to make a distinction, a separation, a contrast between God's ways and the nations. And that's why in the spring, you did something different. You brought your first fruits to God. Now imagine if you lived in the Canaanite culture and you used to see in winter, death, they put the seed on the ground, rains, it comes out. Baal responded, we could eat. I'm so grateful to Baal, I'm going to take all my first fruits and bring it to this God who's trying to beat me over the head with a club. God tells Israel, you see those fools over there, over here? See what they're doing over there? You're not going to do that. You're going to plant like everything else, but from your children, your firstborn, they're mine. I don't need them to continue your fertility because I told you in Genesis, be fruitful and I have told you, you will be blessed in your womb. That's why the commandment is written that way. be blessed in your womb. And this, because God says you don't need the fertility rituals to bring blessing to your womb, to have children. It's the God of Israel who does it. It's not Baal. It's not the gods of the Canaanites. And then all of a sudden you bring your first fruits to God in the temple. Make the contrast. There's no image of any God in the temple. The food is the source for the priests and the Levites and their families. The blood is to restore your standing with him and your relationship with him. And then he says, hey, will you have this meal with me? Then he hosts you. Joe recently did some research that around the temple, on the temple, Il Mikdash, the city of the temple, he did the research and he found, based on some evidence, that the wall surrounding the 500 by 500, they were actually hotel rooms, right, Joe? They were like rooms to make sure, not hotel rooms, but they can stay there and eat all the offerings because of Nila. There was an offering that you have to do. You have to eat it within the Temple Mount. So they have rooms on the walls. I think it's 10 cubits by 10 by 20 cubits. So it's 20 cubits by 10, 3 floors, and it's 2 different, like a little walkway in the middle. Right. So it was perfect order. It's like a huge hotel room in there. He invites you for the feast. You don't pay rent in the city because you're a guest of the Lord. Okay? You were reciprocal. You were bringing like skins, some of the offerings that did not belong to the priest. You will give it to the host of your of the house. Or you will stay in that room to eat it out. You get to have a meal covenant with the Lord in his temple when you go for the feast. He invites you. He wants to restore your family. But what he needs of you is that you make a contrast. It's a two-way street. God gives you provision, protection, but he needs you to make the contrast, to learn to approach him on his holy day. Next Sabbath, I hope you all show up early because we like to do a Torah service. You know, we want to do a Torah service to the best of our ability to honor him first, you know. And therefore, we learn to make a distinction. So when you study the ancient world, for example, in Israel, God dwelt in the midst of his people, Exodus 29:45. In the Hittite, they believed the gods will come and go to the place where they built temples. He will come and go. We don't know when we find favor. He'll show up eventually, right? The interaction with the people. The God of Israel says, and you shall put the lid on the atonement at the top of the altar and put into the ark of witness, which I will give you. And I shall meet with you there and shall be above the lid of atonement. So therefore, once a year, the King of the universe will meet with the high priest, who's the representative of all of Israel, who also represents Adam. He goes into the garden where death does not exist because God's presence is there. And whatever God's presence is, death cannot be present. It's all life. And that's why the priests wore white garments. And that's why the priests had to be perfect. And that's why the priests have to go in on behalf of the people. He represented all of Israel when he will go into the Holy of Holies. The Hittites, they will use idols as mediators. But the problem is, using the idol as a mediator is not a problem, and let me explain. Aren't we the representation of God on the earth? Don't we represent him? Aren't we now made in the image of God? But we are not to be worshipped. We are not to be benefactors. The difference between the idols of the ancient world and us is that I will not accept you trying to worship me, ever. Okay? I will tell you, no, let's come together and I will be a mediator. I will be a broker. I will tell the Creator, Father, this is my friend who is seeking after you. Incline your ear to his prayers. Now we become mediators to intercede on their behalf. Very different. We don't get any worship. All worship. And they believed that the idols was a representation of the gods on the earth. So worshiping them will bring what they needed, when in fact is the God of Israel working through the mediator, for the mediator can bring them closer to God. You follow? We add it backwards now. Okay, continue. Graven images, I already talked about that. Rites of the temples, Aaron and his descendants, they were the only ones who can do the priestly duties. But in the ancient world, a king can do also the rules, the rituals of a temple. And this is the reason why in the temple it's not allowed for a king to do sacrifices, to go do the work of the priest. In the Torah, a king cannot be a priest, and a priest cannot be a king. It's against Torah. The two offices are separated. Two functions have different functions. This is important. Eating blood and using magic. The Torah says in Leviticus and Deuteronomy 18 not to do divination and not to eat the blood, because the Hittites will partake in blood offerings made to their gods by dipping their bread into and eating and drinking the blood. Now, this is for magical spells and things like that. Now, have you ever wondered why is it that Balaam, he said, there's no witchcraft and divination against Israel? Remember he said that in the story? Do you know that the text doesn't tell you? But I could tell you why he was saying that. Because Balaam was a priest of a prophet of the nations, a priest of the nations. They will use the liver. They have the sacrifices. They get the liver, and based on the texture, the color, they used to do divination. And they can go to the king and say whatever was going to happen to them. So when he saw that there was no divination, that the liver didn't say anything to him, he said, there's no witchcraft and divination against Israel. And he gave the clue for the destruction of Israel. He told them, he told Balak, he says, I know how you can destroy them. It's never going to come from the outside when they're worshiping God and they're doing everything correct. It's only going to happen when you defiled with three things: meat sacrifice to idols, fornication, and idolatry. That's exactly the three things that were given to the new believers in Acts 15. So what happened? The women from the kingdom of Balak came down. They enticed the children of Israel. They married into them. They built another tent, a kuva. And there they had sexual intercourse with the women. They ate the meat sacrificed to the idols, and they worshiped their idols. So the demise of the kingdom of Israel always comes from within, never from the outside. If Israel's attacked from the outside and they're defeated, it's because we have transgressed the covenant and we have abandoned the protection of our king. Does that make sense? Now, mind you, things happen in life. I'm not talking about regular things that happen in life or that somebody does to themselves. I'm talking about things that we cannot control, or things that happens in regards to the commandment. If we keep this camp morally pure, okay, we are all ritually unclean. But if we keep it morally pure here, and we do our best to do what we're supposed to do, we'll be blessed. Because God says He will bless us. Does that make sense? But how can we understand what purity is if we do not make the contrast to what the world did to what God requires? And that's what the teaching was supposed to be. What were the animals used for the sacrifices in the temple? A bull, lamb, a pigeon. How about the Hittites? They used pigs and piglets, puppies and dogs. That's why you're not to put a pig on the altar. Not only is bad for you, but it used to be part of fertility rituals and the worship on certain places in the Mediterranean. So God says, you're not going to worship me the way they do it. Don't eat it. Don't even touch it. Because then they think that you're worshiping the God of the underworld and the gods of death. And He's the God of life. Does this make sense? The blood in the temple. The blood from animals was sprinkled on the altar, and the rest was poured out on the ground, covered with dirt. The Hittites will take all the blood from their sacrifices and smear it all over the temple and furniture, as well as partaking in drinking and eating the blood. Now you know why it's not allowed. How come it's to eat the blood? Not only that, but it was also connected with apotropaic worship, underworld gods, the gods of death. So you're not supposed to have any connection with blood that way. Guys, this week we talk about the feast, and the reading is talking about Sukkot. We want to learn about Sukkot. How many times you went to a Sukkot that the last thing they teach is Sukkot? I went to one Sukkot a long time ago, and actually I stopped going there because they never talked about Sukkot. They talked about everything but. I'm thinking like, what happened? I thought we were celebrating a celebration that represents a very important time of the year. So what Joe and I and Juan is going to do, we're going to try to develop a thematic thing you can learn about Sukkot, like last night, from the sukkah, from going into the sukkah. I have a sukkah, he has a sukkah. You can go in if you want to go and, say the prayers, the lulav, which is a command, and eat something in there and stay there for a little bit. Go ahead, Just don't break it down, throw a party in there, and. But the whole idea is to learn about Sukkot. Joe is going to teach you about temple. We're going to do ourselves, teach you about the language of Sukkot through the Bible and the prophetic picture. Let us learn about why we're here. Yes? And I wanted to introduce this type of teaching today to create contrast. We are not here because we want to look like the nations. We are here because we're different than the nations. But what makes us different than the nations? Hey, anyone can come at this time of year, beautiful weather here. Hey guys, let's go camping for 10 days, 7 days. We can meet at night, we can worship, we can sing, we can hang out, we can fellowship, and learn nothing about the Bible. Or we can meet because we're celebrating the ingathering. It's a microcosm of the millennial reign, and we can learn about what we meet and how we're going to respond in the millennial reign, when all the nations must go up to Jerusalem to celebrate tabernacles. By the time Messiah gets here and all the nations go up to Jerusalem, you already know why you're there and what to do when you're there, the readings that will be done when we get there, and how the offerings will take place when you get there. In the meantime, we are having a good time camping in beautiful Tennessee, but you need to learn how it's done in Jerusalem that God prescribed. Because that's where we're headed eventually. Yes? So I pray that this week you're open and you're willing to hear. And if you don't agree, that's fine. At least continue to open your mind to hear more about Sukkot and how it can change our lives and our understanding, not only from the observance, but also from the prophetic. Amen? God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, thank you for this day. Thank you for the first day of Tabernacles. Teach us and lead us, and we will do our best to continue to move closer to you and to learn to please you the way you required. In the name of Yeshua, we humbly ask you to continue to bless us, guide us, and lead us. Amen and amen.